Hello, everyone, and welcome to ChartChamp 2020, the Alteryx session. My name is Kasper Krzewski, and I work as a senior consultant for Clear Intelligence. A little bit about me. I'm a curious and competitive person. I have some various certifications, including Alteryx Expert, which I recently got, and I've been named an Alteryx Innovator. So it's my pleasure to walk you through today's presentation. Now, the agenda for today, we're going to introduce Alteryx. For some of you who have not seen it before, you'll get a little bit of taste of what it can be used for. Then we're going to do a little bit of web scraping with Alteryx. And finally, we'll have some acknowledgements at the end. So let's get to it. Let's introduce Alteryx. Now, before we do, we want to walk through some common data pains. And typically they're centered around a few areas like manual data preparation. Okay, you have some kind of Excel task or something like that. It's error prone. There are formulas that have the wrong cells linked to them and these kind of things. Or you're dealing with dirty data. Somebody gave you a file and there are typos and these kind of data quality issues. Or you're just doing some repetitive report building. It's monthly or weekly and it takes a few hours and it's mind-numbing. Or data pains can center around dependence on other people, IT and developers who have their own timelines and they might not be able to get you your reports as soon as you want them. And that's because, you don't have access to data or your data are all in spread marts all over the place. Data could be siloed, there's lack of collaboration in these kind of issues. Or it could just be that the jobs are too tough and the data are too big for Excel. Once you put more than, let's say, 1 million or records or so in Excel, every click takes 5 minutes. Sometimes programming languages are too technical or overkill for these tasks. So that's when we have Alteryx to the rescue. So Alteryx allows you to connect to any data source wherever it sits. Could be some databases or files or something online in the cloud. You can rapidly explore and analyze these data. You can even handle hundreds of millions of records on your laptop. Alteryx allows you to prep and blend via visual, intuitive, and drag and drop workflow. And you can create workflows that are repeatable. So you build them once and you run them whenever you want. They're shareable. You can build a workflow and share it with somebody else, and that person can run it and get your analytics process. They're auditable. So you can go through and see what's there and maybe you need to account to some regulators. And finally, automated. You can schedule it and just be done with it. So while our presentation is going to focus on Alteryx Designer, I did want to talk briefly about Alteryx Server. This is another product that your corporation may have, and it resides on a machine somewhere. And it allows you to do a couple of game-changing things. One of them is scheduling and automating these jobs. So you might not remember to run your report every morning at 8 a.m., but you can put your Alteryx workflow on the server, schedule it to run 8 o'clock in the morning, let's say weekdays, and that's it. It runs even when you're on vacation. And also you can share, which is a game changer. Your entire corporation can build a corpus of workflows and analytic processes so that there's no double work and people can collaborate on these. So with that very brief introduction, I really want to get to the web scraping with Alteryx. What is web scraping? Some of you may not know what it is and also wouldn't know how to do it in Alteryx. So web scraping typically is turning some kind of semi-structured website code into data. And there's a two-part process. First part is we fetch the raw web code. That's usually just by downloading the HTML, the CSS, the JavaScript, whatever is on that page. And then we extract the meaningful data from that code by parsing, searching for specific things, reformatting, and structuring. Let's talk through a couple of typical business cases. So at a high level, we might want to enrich our existing analytic process with some kind of third-party data, something that we can see online. Or we can automate some kind of tedious or ad hoc process, going to a website, getting information, and just building a one-time report. Sometimes what we've done is we've piloted data before paying for an API to see if the data have value, and then we let the business make a decision. Okay, we can pay for the API because it's worth it, or we can just use the web scraper in lieu of paying for the API if it's that good and reliable. So these are very general cases. What about specific cases? On my screen, I have many, and I'm not going to talk through them to any length. I just want to show you that there's a whole world of possibilities. For example, if you're interested in searching for topics in academic papers and understanding the number of citations and sources and these kind of things, that's doable. If you want to aggregate from SEC filings so that you can use that in an analytics process because you're working in a financial services firm, you can do that easily. And then, it ranges from pulling sentiment analysis from online reports and posts and things like that to, SEO keywords or lead generation. So the variety of cases that can be done in web scraping is very broad. Okay. Now with that, I want to get to the demo. All right, I don't like too many slides. I like to show Alteryx and go through some of the stuff that we've built out. Now, I mentioned many different cases, or I put them up on the slide, and we've done all of those. They're just not shareable. So for today's presentation, I wanted to build something that I could show all of you and walk through in detail without pulling any kind of privileged data or process. Also, given that ChartChamp this year is Halloween themed, I wanted to tie it back a little bit to something Halloween themed and scary and horror. So with that, the original masters of horror bring you birds. And that's Edgar Allan Poe and Alfred Hitchcock, both with a couple of birds. So let's get to Alteryx. Oh, that's just a little about me. And actually, before I do, I have a bird website here, the J.J. Audubon's Birds of America. And on this site, we have some images and some data that we want to scrape. So if we look at this page, and we scroll down, we see plenty of text, we see images and they're tiled, and underneath there are links and so on. What we want to do is we want to scrape this page. And again, by scraping, we mean download the code and then extract something meaningful from it. Now, what we see here is rendered for us. It's visual, it's beautiful. This isn't what a computer sees, and this isn't what Alteryx sees. So quite easily, from any browser, you can usually right-click on the page and hit something like View Page Source. This is the code underneath. There's HTML, there's CSS, there might even be JavaScript and other things going on. And this is what you can download. Now, Alteryx would download this, Alteryx would see all of this, and then you'd have to extract it to get something meaningful. So this is what we talk about when we talk about web scraping. We're taking all of this and turning it into something useful and meaningful that we'll see a bit later. Now, let's go back to Alteryx. I have a fun little app here that I'm displaying, and it's full of some adornment, and over and above what's needed for an analytic process. I just wanted to make it kind of fun. So we have a chart champ logo here. We have Hitchcock and Poe again, same images, just on the workflow. The workflow itself is here. And let's zoom so we can capture this whole thing. We are just pulling some data. We'll walk through some of the tools. And then we are fetching the code from the website. And we are extracting the data to turn it into something usable. So let's just walk through a handful of these tools to see what's happening. And then we'll wrap this part up and see how it works. So we build some links so that we can go through the different pages of that site that I showed you. Now, another curious thing about this site is it has a limitless scroll here until the end, yet when Alteryx sees it, it only sees a paginated site. So there is a limit to the amount of birds here on this page. And then if Alteryx wants to see more, it needs to see, okay, page 1 and page 2 and so on. So that's something curious that I discovered as I started scraping the site. I realized I wasn't getting all the birds. Now, once I have these URLs, and in this case, I have several, you might just have one. It's as simple as using a download tool. And this download tool has several tabs of configurations. We actually don't need any of them in this simple case. We're not using an API or a complex call, and thus we don't need those tabs. We only need to tell Alteryx that this is the field that has the link inside, and then how do we want to output the data that are the code that is downloaded. And outputting it to a string is just fine. Alteryx is going to go to each site, fetch the code, and let us know that it was okay with some kind of HTTP code. Now, if we look inside what Alteryx fetched, it looks like the top of this page. Okay, so it's just not syntax highlighted. So while this appears colorful for us, this is just in plain text. And this is not all of it. Alteryx will only present a little bit of the data to us unless we use a browse tool. Then we can see everything. So if we want to, we can add a browse tool and rerun this, have Alteryx go back and scrape the data, and then we can check this out again. So now you can see that Alteryx has fetched everything. We can just keep scrolling and scrolling from that URL. Now that it has, it's up to us to figure out how we want to extract it. We've already done the download process. That's the easy part in Alteryx. As you can see, it's really just this one download tool. Then we need to figure out how to extract it. And in order to do that, we have to know what's important. And that's just the kind of process of going through this. And typically I like to start in the web browser itself by finding, in this case, a specific bird. So I can look for barred owl. Just do a search here. And there are 1 of 6 matches. So I can just keep looking through them. Now it looks like that bird is in this little block here. Okay, we can see this name displayed. We can see another link here and some other information. And now that I see that, I look down and I see another bird in another block. So this is a good hint of what I should be searching for in Alteryx. I need to tell Alteryx to look for these blocks so we can find these different birds. And then break them up and figure out what to do from there. So downstream, I'm just telling Alteryx to parse out all of the different birds from that HTML. So I tell Alteryx, like, first, just make it easy on me and break up everything into different lines, and then find those bird blocks. And we can see that just within a few tools, we're finding something that looks similar to what we had found manually. Then we can use Alteryx to break this up. It's in HTML, and there are a variety of ways that we can break it up in Alteryx. I like to do something like this using these text to columns tools, which are lifesavers when you're parsing out HTML. And it starts to break this up into something that I can read and understand. You know, I have this, which looks like the name of the bird, and then I have this, which looks like an endpoint of a URL. So we'll hang on to those. And this, I can see that there is some kind of Unicode here. And I just want to see if I can parse out a different way of getting that bird name. And then I just use the select tool here to reduce the fields because I had 15 different fields. Now I turn them into the 4 that I want and rename them with something friendly so that downstream in the process, I know, this field is a URL and so on. Also, while I'm at it, I just use some analytical tools, some transform tools to figure out, how many birds am I getting per page? Remember, these are all paginated. So I'm getting roughly 49 per page. And then I just want to count how many total. So I found 431 birds by looking through this site. Okay, and if I scroll down, they start to load. So I'll take Alteryx's word for it that we have that many. So then I just take that base URL that I know and I add that bird endpoint to it. And that's something easy that I can check. I can just go back to the website and, let's say I click on this brown pelican. I can see that that endpoint that I found is right there. And I just need to add the Audubon URL to it. So that's easy. I just do it in a formula tool here. Sort all the names of the birds, and then I output this information that I have. I also output the total number of birds that I found, and these are 2 separate outputs. Now, why am I just doing that? Well, let's see this in action. So this is a workflow, and it's also an app. For those of you who don't know, an app is an analytic application that we can use in Alteryx that takes feedback from the user. So instead of clicking run to run it as a workflow, I hit the magic wand here and I bring up a little application with custom logo for ChartChamp 2020. And the only question is, are you ready? And I can hit continue here. And then I see a link for a picture book. So why not? Let's just click that and see what happens. And this is a fun little way for me to see the birds and this larger image of each one, as well as a web link to the full page. So all I have to do here is hit continue, and then it's going to run this scrape process, and it's going to launch a second app. This is what's known as chaining apps. And I'll show you why I output 2 different data sets. So at the top, you can see how many birds are available, 431. That's that exact number that I was outputting before. So this is dynamic. Every time we run the app, it'll scrape the site, figure out how many birds are available, because maybe they'll add more in the future. And then when we get to this screen, it'll tell us, hey, here are how many birds we have. Okay, and then we have some more options down here. I don't want to get to them just yet, so I'll just hit cancel here. And this is our main app. This is how we launch our process, and hence the two different outputs. Now, the second app that was launched, that chained app, is right over here. And again, same fun little adornments, images, and things like that. As far as the colors of these containers go, those are less of an adornment and more functional. So here I see a yellow block for input data, and that's pretty standard. I use that in every workflow. So I always know that my inputs are in this block. We can see that it's actually a container, and it has a comment box so that we can see, even when we're zoomed out, what that block does. And the benefits of using these containers are manifold, and one of them is a fun one that we can zoom to any part of our workflow just by using that menu. Now, this is the second app. It's launched automatically when we run the first. And what does this one do? For starters, it picks up that bird total from the previous one. And given that that's written in the first scrape process, it comes out here and we can input it. Oh, there's a little hidden tool here. Let's see if we can bring that to the front. Well, it's hidden. Huh. Anyway, we can bring that count into the app directly by using an interface tool, just this dropdown. So typically the dropdowns are going to ask us questions. In this case, it's feeding us information. That's all. This other input, this is much more useful. It has that same list that we built, and we can see here are the links to these birds. We see some kind of bird name here, all right, and we have those Unicodes that were replaced. And then we also see some kind of bird file name. So this looks more plain than this this official one. And there are no spaces, they're just dashes and things like that. So each one will have its place. Now, I have a filter here, and this filter is picking up information from the user. So if the user is going to make certain selections, then it will show all the birds. Otherwise, it'll just show a specific one. And this one is updated at runtime based on what the user is selecting. Now, there's another download tool here. All right, so let's flip back just for a second. We started off with these just general URLs. They were paginated. So we see, basically this main page, page 1, 2, and on and on. And we ended up with a list of the specific URLs, one per bird. Now that we have those, we actually want to get more detail. So I'll flip back to the website for a second. When I clicked on this brown pelican, there's much more detail here. There is this thumbnail image, and then there's some information. So these are the official notes that JJ Audubon wrote, and we want to pull these down. Okay, copious notes here. At some point, he's going to talk about measurements of these birds, and the adult male versus the adult female, and things like that. Sometimes he puts the Latin names, the scientific names. So there's good stuff here, and we want to pull this down for that bird so we can learn more about it. That's where this download tool comes in. Now that we have that list of birds, we can identify which one we want and get some more info on it. All right, you can see that here's that specific bird URL, and then here's another download data cell. And you can see it's pulling down the raw code from that page. And we have another portion here where we're breaking up that HTML into something usable. So here we have a block which is giving us the URL for that image. And it's not even the thumbnail one, it's a full-size one. So you can see in the background, there's a massively scaled up image, like a high-res image, and then there's this thumbnail one. So if we click on see full plate here, we can actually see that full image and zoom in, and you can see the incredible amount of detail that JJ Audubon put into his work. And this continues to scale. These are magnificent pictures. They're beautiful. So we have Alteryx go and find the URL of the full-size image because it's not directly on the page. There's a link to it. And then we actually have Alteryx scrape again. Now that we know the full-size image, we tell Alteryx to go get it. And here, instead of bringing down a string or something, we tell Alteryx to save the image. And to where? We just make an image location. So we tell Alteryx to save it into a specific folder and use the bird file name, which is this name here with no spaces. Just add a JPG extension. So Alteryx does that. Alteryx will go to the site and download what you tell it to download. And then in other cases, we were just downloading to a string, and then we were busting that string open to parse it and structure it. In this case, we tell Alteryx to download an image and save it. I want to pause here for a second. I was on a project some time ago, and the requirements of the project were to build an image cloud. And one of the project owners pointed us to a website that had 600 images and told us that we have to download these. And my colleague was talking about how he didn't want to go to each image and right-click and save and do that 600 times. I mean, nobody wants to do that. That's an example of a very tedious ad hoc process. Without too much work, we built an Alteryx workflow that went to the site, scraped all the images, and downloaded them to our machine. And it didn't take that long. Now, given that that workflow itself wasn't needed for production, it was just a one-time thing. We didn't have to worry about making it visually pleasing like this. We didn't have to worry about documentation. We just needed the images. So it's a rapid process to build. We ran it. It got us all 600 images, and we were done. And we didn't have to do that really tedious process. So Alteryx will do that for us. Now, contrasting that example to what we have here, again, we have these containers which tell us that Alteryx is doing a specific job. So it's wrangling data here, and then it's downloading or it's inputting, it's doing all these fun things. You probably noticed that underneath each tool, we have some text. When we add a tool to the canvas and we configure it, Alteryx will typically put in some kind of automatic annotation. All right. And what I like to do is I like to change that annotation to something that makes sense to me, because I don't want to open up this workflow 2 weeks from now or a year from now and wonder, why am I doing this? Why is this tool here? So I write notes to myself and to other people so that it's very easy for anybody to open up the workflow and know, okay, this tool is doing this. So now that we have these really multiple levels of web scraping, we go to a page, we find some links in it and some data, and then we scrape those links and on. Then we're going to build out a fun report. But before we do, here we've downloaded a full image. You can see that in my filter tool, I only have one row, which corresponds to that full image, and I have plenty more. So what is that? Well, let's go over to our site once again, and let's view, we're on Brown Pelican. Okay, let's view the page source here. I think we have to scroll just for a bit to find the body text. And by body text, I just mean this info here, all of these notes. So if we scroll for a bit, we see that even something as simple as this, that looks rendered beautifully to us as just plain text with no kind of code or anything, has HTML tags inside of it. So something like this, with different tags in between lines of text, is going to be downloaded as is in Alteryx, and then it'll be up to us to figure out how to turn this into something rendered beautifully again. So these 954 lines represent all of the other data, or sorry, all of the other code from that site. And then we want to separate them into things that are usable. So we just use a couple of multi-row tools to figure out, okay, where are the headers? Okay, by headers, I mean, something like this. So we know the name of the bird, the plate number, and scientific name if that's included, as well as the body of the text. So all of the different notes that J.J. Audubon wrote for this specific bird. And we can scroll down, we have 32 lines of this. So if we just use our regular analytics tools in Alteryx to combine them into just one field, and this field has, again, all of the HTML and anything else inside, we haven't figured out how to remove all those tags yet, all right? In the first app, I showed a copious use of text to columns to break open all of the HTML and strip it away. Here, I'm fine with leaving it, and we'll see why in a few moments. Now I have this imposing looking vulture here, and this is not a regular tool in our tool set. This is actually a macro. And with macros, we can add our own images. So we can pick anything custom. So I'm doing a bird presentation. I picked a bird that I liked, and I added that custom image to the macro. And the macro, its job is to take this HTML and render it into something. So if we open up this macro, this is an example of a batch macro, and it just runs once per bird. So if we want to input many different birds, we can, and it's going to render everything once. It'll do one render per bird, or we can just do the one bird and be done with it. And we can see that this has some control parameters. It actually has yet another macro inside of it. This is what's known as a crew macro. So if you've been using Alteryx for a while, you probably know about crew macros. I did not build this. This is downloaded, and it has yet another macro inside. So this is just nesting macros to do specific jobs so that we can have the fruits of all of those analytic processes without recreating them every time we want to do some process. So this macro has several standard macros inside of it, and I'm utilizing those so I don't have to recreate them. And when that body of text is rendered, what I want to do is I want to combine it. Okay, we're just going to combine it with the bird URL. And here we're going to use the reporting suite. So why do we want to use the reporting suite? Because we have some images, we have some body of text, and we want to do something meaningful. So I'm just going to display a couple of things here. So this is the full plate. It's massive. Okay, and we're looking at this in the Browse tool. It's hard to see. No problem there. Let's look at this. This is the bird summary. You may notice that we saw this briefly in that picture book. So we see the name of the bird, we see a scaled down image, and then we see a link to it. There are also some other reports here that are being built, and they're based on these different images and text and things like that that we're rendering. So now that we've kind of briefly looked at these, let's look at the outputs. Okay, let's look at what we actually get. So I launch the app here, and we saw this before. So it tells us how many birds there are, and we can go bird by bird if we want to. We can show the American avocet, or we can look at the bird of Washington, whatever that is. We can look at this black vulture or carrion crow. Let's pick the American flamingo. And again, I have a link here to view the picture book. So I'm going to view the American flamingo. And I click Finish. Now this is taking those upstream things that we scraped before, those links to the birds. It's scraping and scraping a few times so we can get the full-size images, so we can get the text body and we can render it, and then it's outputting something for us. We can see here app results. I'll just make this a little bit larger. And we see output files. We'll get to that in a few moments. We see a bird plate. Let's look at that. This is actually that full-size image. Takes a moment to render, and then also this is a little too massive for what we want here, but that's okay. It's good to output this just for a demo. And we see the bird summary, and this is the smaller plate with a nice little link here. Let's look at the output files. There are 4 of them. The first 3 are just temporary and just output. I'm just writing them to a temp file so that I can open them up and look at them. And then the 4th one is actually saved on my laptop somewhere. So I'm fine displaying all 4. I just click OK and everything will launch. Here's the American flamingo as an image on my machine. So I'll zoom in here and we can see this beautiful bird and all of these notes. So this is great. And I'll close that. Similarly, I have it in an HTML doc if I want to see it that way instead of an image. I can just scroll all the way down here. And you can see that these links and bold and italic and everything have been rendered the way we would see them in the site. I have the link here. I can just click on that. And we've scraped everything from here. Now this is kind of basic. I know we're just scraping from here and putting it into another HTML doc or into an image. If we wanted to, we can scrape specific pieces of information like the sizes of these birds. So maybe we can put those into an analytic process and see, which birds are the biggest or smallest and things like that. Close that out. And then here we have, again, that picture book view with the name of the bird, this scaled down plate, a link to the bird. And then we should have one more file. Here's the full plate itself. And I can zoom in because this is the high resolution one. And we can see the amount of detail. So I just close that out. And for some of you who've been wondering, okay, what if we don't want to go bird by bird? What if we want to show all the birds? Okay, let's see what happens. We click that radio button. Notice that the bird by bird box has disappeared. I no longer see that. Now I see this, and it says, oh, asteroid field ahead. Are you certain? And no is the default, because this could be scary, looking at all the birds in one shot. What if we click yes? And we get another message. The odds of navigating this asteroid field are 3,720 to 1. It says go back. Okay, let's be brave and proceed. Never tell me the odds. Awesome. So we can click finish here, and then it'll go through all of the birds, and it would launch several hundred images and HTML docs and things like that for us. So we're not going to go through that. Might take a little bit, and we can just click exit here. So that's this process. And let's go back to PowerPoint. Now we've covered many different things in this walkthrough. We covered web scraping with multiple levels, what I call rescraping. And if you joined and you didn't know what web scraping was, now you have a better idea. We're scraping some fun stuff, some images and the body of text. We could easily just, scrape something different in a different page and turn it into something tabular so we can do analytics on it. But now you have an idea. And we also showed earlier some business cases that, will give you an idea of when you might want to web scrape. We looked at apps. So in Alteryx, these are these menu-driven workflows that accept user commands, user parameters. And we looked at chaining them, meaning when we go back here and we see we have one app open. So that was this first app. And it just asks, are you ready? And we say yes, we continue here. It runs, and then it launches a second workflow. So if we want to, we can chain as many apps as is desired. So they do some kind of process and output the data into the next app. And that's, again, how we get this number to be dynamic as well as this list. So if the number of birds changes, and let's say new birds are added or removed, then this list will also be updated because the data are scraped live right before this app is open. And then this app gets the output of those data. We also looked at crafting a UI. So for me, I went a little fun with it here and had this different radio button with some funny little messages, and you may get the reference, you may not, that's okay. So you can get creative, clever, and you can put in these custom messages to let people know, like, hey, this process might take 10 minutes or whatever the case is, and really give people a good user interface for using your apps. We also talked about macros. Standard and batch are the more common types of macros, and they are these self-contained analytics processes that we don't want to build over and over. We just build them once, and then we can insert them into other workflows. And we also looked at how I have a custom image on mine. We looked just a little bit on the reporting palette. So the reporting palette is how we actually rendered the HTML and how we put all those images and links and things like that together. So you can see an example here. This is text with an image and a URL. So that's done in the reporting palette. And that's something that we did in this case. You can build out complete reports, actual analytics reports, using the reporting palette in Alteryx, complete with different kind of visualizations, different charts, bar charts and scatter plots and these other kind of things, dynamic text, whatever the case is. Also, we are outputting these bird by bird. So if you had different reports that needed to be built for different people or different business units, different groups, whatever, regions, whatever, you could output those reports by region, by group, by, recipient, or whatever the case is. So that's a little bit more on the reporting palette. And then some best practices for thinking about Alteryx as a self-contained document. So annotations, containers, and common boxes for sure. The adornment is just a little bit more fun. And by adornment, I mean these images that I put, just to get a little bit of the white space, covered with something nice. But again, the best practices here, having a nice little header with some details about what this workflow or app does, putting tools together into the same containers that do the same job, all right? And then the tools themselves have annotations so that you know why they are there. Well, why is this particular tool here? Because it picks up this plate that was downloaded and then brings it back into Alteryx so it can be displayed and put into a report. Now, this presentation would not have been possible without the people listed here. I want to thank all of them. And I also want to thank all of you for being on this brief journey to learn about web scraping and web scraping in Alteryx. And as a bonus, it wasn't just web scraping, it was all of the other things that we mentioned, the apps, the macros, the reporting suite, some best practices, and so on. That's the end of my presentation. I see that throughout the presentation, there have been some questions coming in, and I wanted to leave a few minutes for any of those questions or anything else. So we have about 7 minutes or so. Varun, Dustin?
Sure. Looks like there's 2 questions, and I know Jeff said he could answer them too, but whoever wants to answer it. One of them was...
Yeah, I'll take them live.
Okay. One of them was, could Alteryx scrape images from an internal system that requires user access?
That's a tricky one, and the answer is usually yes. When I say usually, I mean that it won't be yes all the time. Alteryx, in the download tool, we have some abilities to put in authentication here, either in the header or payload or connection, something like this. So you'd have to play around, without knowing the specifics of this internal site that has authentication, you'd have to play around. Typically, yes, and we've had plenty of cases where the website that we want to go to has a barrier. It's a public site, and we can get to it. We just can't scrape anything until we authenticate ourselves. So Alteryx will give us overtly here this connection box with username and password, or we can bake them into the headers that are delivered via like an API call, like a curl call or something.
Yep.
So usually yes.
Awesome.
Great question.
One more. So can Alteryx scrape any financial or quality performance reports that are available to the general public? Do you need to specify the specific URL, or can Alteryx scrape the web like a Google search? I wish.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Alteryx is not like a web crawler, I think, is more along the lines of what this person is intending. So Alteryx is not going to just scrape everything in the world. You have to tell it to go somewhere specifically. And so let's go back here for a second. I told Alteryx to scrape 9 different sites. So in theory, if you wanted to scrape everything, you'd list everything, tens of thousands of sites or whatever in here. A couple of problems with that is it would take a while. Like if you open up all those sites in your web browser, all of that web traffic over your internet connection would be a little bit slow, and Alteryx has to do the same thing. It has to go to those browsers and get all the code. So doing too many sites could take a while, and also, I'm scraping sites that have the same structure. If you're scraping multiple sites and they all have a different structure, different code, different things like that, then down here, when you start to parse, it's going to be tough. So you want to be pretty targeted in what you're scraping, and you don't want to scrape too much. Okay, that's up to you. Can it scrape tons of sites? For sure. Can it parse them out? For sure. That's just up to you and your design.
All right.
Okay, Dustin, any other questions?
Yeah, we got a few more. I don't know how much time we have for all of them, but one was, can we use the Alteryx Scheduler to check the web links automatically and get the values? And if so, do we require an additional tool access for the scheduler?
Sorry, Dustin, one more time?
Yeah, I think basically the question is, can we use the Alteryx Scheduler to run this on an automated basis to check the websites and scrape them?
Yeah,
And do we
yeah.
need an additional tool for that, like Alteryx Server, or can we do it with Designer?
With Designer, you need to have a scheduling license. So typically you just have the Designer license. If you want to automate on your machine, you need to add a scheduler license so that it can do these things on some sort of schedule. And so if you have that or server, then yes, they can be automated. And you can take it many steps further. So you can have this run, let's say, every hour, because that's how often you expect birds to be added or your analytics process to feature updates. And then if there are updates, you can send yourself an email and say, create a custom email, even with the new data inside as a formatted table, and say, hey, here are the new updates. You can send that email out to other people, the end users of your report, the consumers, and say, my process ran automatically, and there are updates. Here's the link to this dashboard or this report, and be done.